In the last month, there's been two reports that have come out as a bit of an update on climate change. Now, I'm no expert on this stuff and I recommend reading through some of the material, but just a couple of takeaways that I took from it. The first one is the CCC report, the Committee on Climate Change, and they're there to inform Parliament and future policy on how we're getting on with our progress towards net zero. So the CCC report on Scotland just came out quite recently, and it was quite opportune because we were writing the next phase of the strategy for our business. So I was able to take the CCC report, and that gives an indication of how government policy is going to go and on what we need to do to get us towards net zero. Key takeaways were, one of the few things that's going right is the decarbonisation of grid energy. So as more and more wind and solar comes on, every kilowatt hour of electricity that we use is far less carbon intensive than it was 5 years ago. We need to start using that more and more. So when we look at heat in buildings and transport, the emissions from those have stayed largely the same. And that's where we're missing our opportunities. We need to look at where fossil fuels are being directly consumed, directly burned, and get rid of those consumers of those fossil fuels, and we need to switch them to electrification. And switching to electrification makes sense because we've already got the grid so much cleaner than it was, and with the new offshore wind farms coming on board, more solar being connected at distribution level, and far more battery storage coming online, we're going to see grid carbon intensity continue to drop. So electrification is going to make more and more sense, and targeting those sites where we can take a fossil fuel and replace it with an electric source is very much the way to go. We expect government policy to go that way, and in any case, that's the way that we will continue to push with our future development of the business. The other report that came out in the last month is the European Climate Risk Assessment, which is published by the European Union. It's authored by a lot of the same authors as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and is a very, very rich source of information. It's largely talking not so much about emissions, but about how Europe needs to adapt to its changing climate. And the reality is that Europe has, until now, suffered significantly less than the global south in terms of the effects of the warming of the planet. But the science is indicating that Europe will now be the fastest warming continent on the planet for the next few years. So 2023 was the hottest year on record, the first time that global temperatures have crossed 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels in history, and it's the hottest year in 100,000 years that this planet has experienced. The forecast is very much that will continue to get hotter unless emissions are drastically cut. And the economic case for this is overwhelming. For example, last year, Slovenia lost 16% of their GDP due to flooding. We're talking about the effect of sea level rise alone, ignoring all other effects of climate change, costing more than €1 trillion. That's an unfathomable amount of money, and far more than it'll cost to shut down the oil and gas industry and replace it with cleaner alternatives. So the European Climate Risk Assessment, very much worth a read. A slightly scary document to digest, but if that doesn't inspire you to take action, then I don't know what will.